There's so many different free motion quilting feet. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 4 more in the ASR. How do I know which one to use? Maybe I'll go to Janome Junkies and see if they have a video. Hey guys, it's Boki here from Gigi's Fabric Shop, home to Janome and Juki Junkies, and in today's video we're going to be talking about free motion quilting and all of your options and what that looks like on the Janome machines. So how this video is going to be laid out for you guys today, just so you know what to expect, we're going to talk about free motion quilting and what that looks like on a majority of the Janome machines. So just setting your machine up for free motion quilting, dropping those feed dogs down, and the steps and the tips that I would help give any of my customers, and of course you guys, on how to do free motion quilting and how to get a little better at it. And then of course with Janome there is this whole cool world of the ASR, and the ASR is their stitch regulator that they have made that works exclusively with some models that they offer. And we'll get into that, and I do have a video that deep dives into that, but we're going to go over all of your options. So especially if you are somebody who is on the market and trying to find your next sewing machine, this is something to think about. Or if you have a Janome machine and you just want to know how to free motion quilt, this is also going to be a great video for you. Let's go over a couple helpful tips that really do apply across the board, whether you're free motion quilting standard or using the ASR. A couple things that just make life easier. The first one's going to be your extension table. Having an extension table or having the machine dropped down into a cabinet with a flat working area is always going to be super helpful when free motion quilting. Don't have gravity work against you, have it work with you. So having the quilt nice and flat so that way things aren't being weighed down, it's just going to make your stitches so much better, and it's going to make your whole gliding experience so much easier because it's not all this weight bearing down. It's just going to save you a lot of problems, I promise. So having an extension table or a nice flat working area is always going to be step number 1. Step number 2 is making sure you're using the right needle. So my preferred needle that I always recommend for free motion quilting is going to be a Schmetz Topstitch Needle. In the size 9014 specifically, those Schmetz needles have that unique characteristic of a really large eye. That large eye helps to prevent skip stitches, creating a larger loop for the bobbin and the top to connect. So that's really helpful because the nature of free motion quilting is so jerky and the fabric is moving and the needle is flexing. Sometimes you can experience skip stitches, and a lot of the times when we think of skip stitches, we think of having to size up into a bigger needle. Well, the 9014 top stitch needle kind of helps solve that little issue that you might have. So definitely stick with a 9014, preferably a top stitch. It's a really great place to be for that type of sewing. Next thing I want to talk about is your bobbin case. So depending on what machine you have, you do have the capability on deciding what type of bobbin case you would like. So Janome does have 3 different types of bobbin cases, and I'm going to try to make this as least confusing as possible because they did recently just change some of the colors on the bobbin cases. The standard bobbin case is normally red, but it also can be yellow. So like on some of the newer models, like the 1000 and the 100, those machines, their standard bobbin case is yellow instead of red. Whereas on this machine and my other machines, most of the bobbin cases are red. So the standard bobbin case is made for a 50-50 tension, and that's also a 10 gauge tension is how Janome says it. So you certainly could use that type of bobbin case for free motion quilting. Definitely do a test run to see what it looks like, but for the best results, you definitely want to consider maybe making a purchase to the blue dot bobbin case, which is a 8 gauge bobbin case, meaning that the tension is loosened up a little bit just to help that nature of free motion quilting, since things tend to flex more. The tension is not as regulated like with your feed dogs, so it's not like evenly fed. It's just a little bit different. It's an unnatural way of your traditional sewing. So adjusting that bobbin tension is really going to help make your stitches look a lot nicer. But if you're not sure if you necessarily need that, definitely do a little test run on your machine and see how things are going. Another helpful thing is knowing your stitch plate. So you certainly can free motion quilt with your standard needle plate, which is just the Jellybean needle plate, allowing you to do all the stitches. Most of the Janome machines are very smart, and when you put the straight stitch needle plate or you put the decorative stitch plate, it's gonna deselect or unhighlight the things that you can or can't do in that setting. So when you have the decorative stitch plate on, all of the options are there. You can do everything under the sun because it has the largest range for the needle to move left and right. But when you put your straight stitch plate on, there's a little sensor that gets read that that plate is on, and then all of the other options get unhighlighted, meaning the machine won't let you select them because you'll damage things and it can't physically do it with that needle plate on. That needle plate is really commonly used when you want to do straight stitch work, when you're doing fine fabrics, because with a larger opening, that fabric can get sucked down. So using it for free motion quilting, also in embroidery, is really nice because it just allows less flex of the fabric going up and down as you're free motion quilting, so not as much fabric can get sucked down. Again, ultimately enhancing your stitch quality as you're free motion quilting. So I usually like to recommend working with a straight stitch plate when doing embroidery and free motion quilting. Another little helpful tool is having something to just help you get through the free motion quilting. Of course, you can use your hands. There's little paddles that you can purchase half of the time. There's all kinds of cool gadgets and gizmos out there, but I love a good old-fashioned pair of quilting gloves. These are our Gecko gloves, and they come in a variety of sizes, and these are fantastic because they just allow me to have a better grip of my fabric. The top has like this non-grip kind of coating to it, so I just feel like I have a firmer, better grip on the fabric, and versus my hands. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I get clammy hands as well, so this just allows me to have a nice, clean, unclammy grip on the fabric. So these little tips help no matter where you're going, what you're doing, and how you're free motion quilting. But let's talk about some of the settings and the things that you want to do to properly set yourself up for standard free motion quilting where you are in charge of regulating your stitches. All right, so now let's go over some of the settings that you would set up on your Janome machine. So across the board, the goal in free motion quilting is to drop your feed dogs, because the feed dogs are not working. You are freely moving the fabric underneath the foot. We're going to talk about feet and the different options that you might run into on your machine and that you can purchase additionally if they didn't come with your machine, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Let's just talk about the settings, getting the machine ready. So step number one, once you have the bobbin case figured out and the needle and all that good stuff, you're set up here. Now the physical settings on the machine. So depending on your machine, you might have to manually drop your feed dogs down, and you'll just have to locate that on your machine or even see if your machine has that capability. But the nice thing about some of the larger models from Janome, their higher end models, is that they have shortcuts on the screen. So it's in this little t-shirt right here. So when you click the t-shirt, you'll notice that there's different categories and things here. And this little one is where you'll find a lot of the more free motion like work, and you'll find the free motion category. And this really does stay the same across the board. For any machine that has an LCD screen, they always have that little t-shirt. You can always find it pretty quick. So it doesn't matter if you're on the Skyline 7, the 9, the 9450, some of the older models to the newer models, it really has stayed consistent. So once you get into your machine, it'll show you the options that you have. The machine is always communicating to you how you can achieve those stitches. So for example, on the M8 here that I'm working with today, this first straight stitch is on the PDH foot, which is also known as the darning foot. It's a hopping free motion quilting foot. This is the left needle position for the same foot, and then this is the zigzag foot for the zigzag stitch for the same foot. Now the M8 is one of the few machines that is compatible with the ASR, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. But once you start getting into these lower stitches, you'll see that ASR does activate once it's plugged in to allow you to do that. But these bottom stitches are very similar to the top ones, but these use different feet. These are for the QC and the QO feet. These feet actually snap onto the ankle and they don't physically hop up and down like this row of stitches does. So really you just have to decide what you're looking for. Most people just want a center needle position, and just depending on what foot, then you would pick that adjustment. So dropping the feed dogs is step number one. Getting to the screen to set your machine to communicate what you're doing is step two. The nice thing about these machines is when you do these shortcuts, the machine is going to drop the feed dogs for you, because that's the whole point of the t-shirt. The t-shirt is those shortcuts, things to just get to where you're going faster and easier without having to think about it. Now, stitch length is another big one too. So when you're free motion quilting, you are in charge of the stitch length. So there is no stitch length. The only time the stitch length actually becomes illuminated on a machine is if you have the ASR, then you can play with that. I definitely recommend that you guys watch the ASR video that I have. It goes into grave detail about how that works and what machines that's compatible with. We'll have that link down in the description for you, so definitely check that out if you are more intrigued, but I'll touch on it briefly today. So really there is no stitch length in free motion quilting. You are in charge of regulating your speed unless you have a stitch regulator. The next important thing to know is your speed. So most machines have speed control, so this way you can allow yourself to set up your maximum or your minimum. So hey, if my machine sews 1,000 stitches per minute, halfway is probably going to give me, 500 stitches per minute, and that's as fast as I want to sew, right? So each machine has a different range, a different, caliber that it goes through, but speed is a very important factor when you are free motion quilting, because since you are in charge of regulating your stitches to make them nice and consistent, and as I free motion quilt here in a second, I'll show you guys that, speed is a big factor. Staying at one consistent speed is going to tremendously help you to try to regulate those stitches as much as possible. So I usually recommend for people to kind of start at about that 30 to 40% on your speed control, and start there and then adjust as you need. Maybe you need to go slower, maybe you need to go faster, but speed control is certainly a very great place to start. All right, so now let's talk about the different feet, since I kind of mentioned that here on the screen. Janome has a wide variety of feet that they offer, so you just kind of have to decide what fits your needs the best, what's gonna fit your quilt the best, and which one you're most comfortable with. All right, so let's just go through some of the feet. There is so many different options, but the M8 does come with a wide variety of options. So that PDH foot that I was talking about while we were on the screen is gonna really be qualifying for these two guys. So these two guys, as you can see here, this foot is just kind of like a jelly bean shape, and it has these two little red markings, and it allows you to do your free motion quilting almost in any needle position, as well as the zigzag type of free motion quilting. So this is the PDH foot, and then this is also a PDH foot. It's just the open type. So it's much like that foot right here. It's just cut out in the front. So that way you have a better visibility. So when would you use one over the other? Just really depends on your project. I usually say a good rule of thumb for using closed type of free motion quilting feet is whenever you have a quilt with texture and with layers or flanges or appliques, things that are dimensional on the quilt, I always usually recommend a closed type of foot, so that way things don't get caught on it, for instance, like this foot can. Now most quilts, if they're just flat and not very dimensional, not a lot of layers, you can certainly do this to get your best visibility possible. Another thing to note about these two feet is that these feet are going to hop. This little bar right here is actually going to sit on the needle, and it's going to move up and down with the needle bar, and it's actually going to physically hop. It's going to make brief contact with your quilt. Some people like the hopping style foot and some people don't. So really just comes down to your preference. It's nice to have that moment of contact. It just helps kind of create better stitch quality. So it just really comes down to what you're doing and what you need it for, but this is one option. Next, we have the ruler foot. This might come with your machine or it might be an optional accessory, but the ruler foot is designed specifically for free motion ruler work, so that way the ruler can sit up right next to this little ledge right here and not slide over the foot or under the foot, ultimately hitting the needle. This is for that precise needle work, for ruler work, and your machine has a specific shortcut just for that if your machine is set up like that. Now this little group of feet is really all very similar. Much like the ruler foot, it doesn't hop. So these two feet hop, this one doesn't. It stays right in place and you just move it freely, and you have to work at it that way. But these feet also don't hop. So there's just a wide variety here. This is a open toe foot as well. This is your QO foot, I believe. So you can see there, it's just front open toe. This is the same kind of foot, just closed. Again, depending on what you're working with. This is the QZ foot, so this would be for the zigzag style free motion quilting where the foot doesn't hop. And then this is your echo quilting foot. So if you wanted to echo your designs or your quilt's design or like a panel, this is a fun way to kind of do a echo style quilt and follow that last symmetrical line and stay even. So this little group doesn't hop, these two do, and then your ruler work is specifically for rulers. It's pretty thick, but it has that little dip down in the front so you can kind of see a little better. I'm gonna install the PDH foot just for you guys to see how this hops, and then we'll put one of these guys on so you see how it doesn't, just so you see it side by side. All right, so to put the PDH foot on, we're just going to loosen the screw, and you're going to entirely take this whole ankle and foot off, just like so. And then you're gonna grab this little guy, and you're gonna put him like this. And once he's in position, tighten it with your hand as best as you can, and then go in with your screwdriver and tighten that down. so we have that PDH foot installed, and I have it set up on my shortcut for free motion quilting in just that straight stitch number 1 because I want a center needle position and I want to let the machine know that I'm using that PDH foot. So I'm going to put the presser foot down, and you'll notice that this is the bar I was talking about earlier, how it sits above the little needle set screw. That's what's going to make that foot hop up and down, and this spring is going to activate it. So watch as we go. I'm going to press start. It's going to do 1 single stitch for me, and the reason that it does that is so it allows me to bring up my threads. You don't necessarily have to do that, but of course it's nice to do a little tie off to make sure things are nice and secure. So I have both of my thread tails up, put my foot back down, and I'm just going to start going. So you'll see the foot is hopping, and I am set to about a 30 to 40% speed right now. And this is working pretty good for me. I can like manage my stitch length here. So the goal is to really just regulate how fast or how slow you're moving. Watch what happens when I move really fast. Those stitches get very, very long. So the goal here is to try to stay at a consistent motion with your hands. If the speed is the same and you're not having to press hard on your pedal and you keep it at that one consistent speed, it's kind of nice. It's just a little hack to try to get your stitches to stay a little bit more regulated. So then after that, it's all about trying to go the same consistent speed to make sure that those stitches really stay the length that you want them to. And I am by no means a free motion quilting expert, you guys, so sometimes I struggle with thinking about what to free motion quilt here, but that's the whole point, is just practice and have fun and just enjoy it. So here you can kind of see my stitches. I did pretty good for the most part, but the real goal is just trying to maintain your speed. So now let me put on one of those feet that don't hop so you can kind of see what that looks like in comparison to the PDH foot. All right, so for these little feet that don't hop, these are snap-on feet, and you'll actually need your standard ankle for this. So the one that we took off to put the PDH actually works out for me to have this off to show you how to put this on because it's just a little bit easier. So you'll notice on the back side of this, it has this little cutout groove, and then of course here where your feet snap on. When you look at these little feet, there's a 2-part snap-in system here. It has this back and this front. This back bar has to go into this little cutout, and then this front bar has to actually snap in. So it helps because like this, you have a little bit more control. So you see how it just slides into the back, and then you push it to the front, and it just snaps right into position. And then to take it off, you just press your back little handle and it gets detached, but it's very simple. You just snap it on and to the front just like so. All right, so to put this back on, we just kind of go back in steps, loosen this screw to take our little PDH foot off like this, and then we'll just take our little ankle and pop that right back on, tighten it with your hands as best as you can, and then go in with that screwdriver and just give it a good little tighten. All right, so now that we have that foot installed, we make sure that you're letting the machine know. So I'm gonna go now to stitch number 3 because that's the one that shows me I can use my QC and my QO for it. So when I put my presser foot down, it has a little bit of different. You see how it's just like lightly grazing the fabric? You see that? But I can still absolutely freely move without a problem. I'm gonna tuck in my little tail here underneath, just so it's out my way. I'm gonna press start. The machine's gonna do 1 single stitch for me, so that way I could bring up that bobbin thread if needed. And then once I press start, I get to free motion quilt. And you see how it's not hopping now. Now I am in charge of freely moving everything. And it's just a different way to do this. I find both ways really easy. Honestly, I don't think I have a preferred way of doing it. I think this way feels a little bit easier because there's not that like kind of lag from it touching down completely. So it just depends on your personal preference. There's not really a right or wrong way of doing this, but I find this to be a little bit more precise, and I feel like I can regulate my stitches a little bit better this way versus the way that I had it. I can see my bobbin tail peeking through this way though, and my bobbin thread is like a dark blue, so that's when that bobbin case would certainly come in handy here to help save the day because it's balanced a little bit differently. Now let's talk about the ASR. So ASR is a little bit more exclusive, but it is a Janome product. So which machines can work with the ASR? Well, it's a little limited, but it certainly is something to think about if you're deciding on purchasing a new machine. The M8, of course, that I'm working on today does take the ASR. The the CM17, and then the 9480 also takes the ASR. So those three models are compatible with it, and depending on the model, it might come with it. ASR is your accurate stitch regulator. So what this does is all the little tips and tricks that I was just telling you about your speed, about how fast you're moving or how slow you're moving, that all gets eliminated. The whole learning curve of trying to relax and move swiftly kind of gets thrown out the window with the ASR. The ASR has a little sensor on the bottom that actually can tell how fast or how slow you're moving, and it will try its very best to regulate its stitches the entire time. And it does a really, really good job. Like I said, I did do a deep dive on the ASR, so I'm not going to go super gravely into detail, but I am going to install it onto the machine just so you see how much easier it is with the ASR and just how appealing a feature like this is. So I'm going to put it on, but definitely check out that video if you want to deep dive into it and all the settings and how it works and the do's and don'ts, because it's a really, really cool thing. So, or if you have it at home and you've never tried it, this is your little push to do it. So let me go ahead and put the ASR on and we'll get started. All right, so the ASR is installed. It's really simple. You just take off the whole ankle and foot combo again, and then you just install it and you plug it into the back of the machine. And as far as the settings go on the screen, I'm still in stitch number 3, but now I have the ASR activated, so that way it knows that I have this on. And of course, that option only pops up when it's physically plugged into the machine. And then remember how I said the stitch length is normally not a factor, but in ASR it is, because since this little guy is doing all the work for us, we can tell it how big we want those stitches. I do talk about stitch length in that deep dive on the ASR, so definitely check that out if you are intrigued. But I just have it set at a 2.4 right now. I'm going to put my presser foot down, and remember, speed control is not a factor here. I can move as fast or as slow as I'd like to, but of course if you set it at a 50% speed, you can't really go any faster than that. So usually what I like to do is kind of set it all the way to my max, and then just kind of work from there. So you're just going to press start. It's going to take that one single stitch for us to bring up the threads. If not, otherwise you're ready to rock and roll. So now it doesn't matter if I'm trying to go slow or if I'm trying to go fast. The machine is trying to maintain my 2.4 stitch length. And I would say it's doing a pretty good job. So here you can see those nice little tight stitches, and if sometimes I move faster, sometimes I move slower, you can certainly hear that in the machine as it's trying to adjust and keep up with me, but that's a really great way to do that. So the whole learning curve of going too fast or going too slow kind of gets taken out. Full disclaimer, if you do move too slow or too fast, you'll still experience this on this ASR a little bit, especially if you're going really fast. Like, watch what happens. It's actually really hard to even get it to do it. So here you can kind of see it. The stitches got really, really long. Definitely not a 2.4, but I had to really work for it. So it's trying to do its best to keep up with you. So definitely do keep that in mind, that there is still a little bit of, patience that you have to have, but way less thinking than your traditional free motion quilting setup that you had to do. I really do love the ASR, and I think if you're somebody who's really trying to take your free motion quilting up to the next level, this is something to absolutely consider. So just like that, with the proper steps, free motion quilting doesn't have to be so scary. It does take a lot of practice if you don't have something as convenient as the ASR, but like I said, with the right practice, practice makes perfect. Definitely take your time. It can be a really fun thing. And you can tackle smaller projects like little pot holders or little bowl cozies or something a little more fun, so it doesn't feel like such a big project to tackle on a quilt. So let's talk about the machines really quick. We are Janome Junkies. We're a small family-owned business here in Brandon, Florida, and we take a lot of pride in selling Janome machines. We love their machines and the quality that they produce, especially this awesome technology like ASR. This is just so cool and really makes free motion quilting so much more approachable and fun for somebody who wants to get into that. So the beautiful machine that I am on today is the M8. Look at this throat space. If you are on the market and looking for something with a nice large workspace, the beautiful table that comes with it, and the ASR capability, this might be the machine for you. Remember, there's a couple other models that also work with the ASR. It's that CM17, which is the top of the line, and then there's the 9480, which we also do have some videos on that you guys can watch. So it just really depends on your needs, but I mean, this throat space, this is what we need, what us quilters want, to not have to be pushing our quilts into that smaller throat space. So this is a fabulous way to get that ASR capability, have a nice large throat space, and then of course you can still free motion quilt without it. Hey, or maybe you have this machine, or maybe you have the 9480 and you don't have the ASR. So if you're interested in purchasing yourself a new machine or purchasing the ASR, definitely give Janome Junkies a call and we are here to help you. There's also our email down below. You can shoot us an email if you prefer to reach to us that way, and you can also head to janomejunkies.com for some more information specifically on the M8 or the 9480. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you feel a little bit more confident in free motion quilting, or feel a little more comfortable to take out your ASR and play with it, because it really is super, super easy. Check out that description down below for more information, more videos that I referenced here today, and for any links to any products. And I hope to see you on our next video. Make sure you subscribe to never miss out on new content, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.